Hi everyone, this is Joe and Ben again. We are recording an extra episode because of the current event. You might have seen Signal coming up in the news this week because of the Trump administration mishandling of their internal communications, which has led to some speculations on whether Signal is actually secure. So we are going to clarify that in this episode. Enjoy. I made a small an introduction of what happened. So
we might want to keep for the record. We're talking on March 28th around noon, a bit after noon European time.
Just if you don't know what we're talking about, probably a lot of people do know because Signal has been coming up. But basically, a person called Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, accidentally added the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, in a Signal group chat where several other members of the group, including also J.D. Vance and Mike Waltz, were chatting about very specific war plans, information about weapons, targets, timing, and so on. And I guess while we're not gonna, or at least I wasn't planning to read or go into the details what all the message said, but maybe before we actually talk about Signal and security, just what is the most appalling to me in this story is not only the plain incompetence and arrogance and stupidity of these people, but also the fact that the content of the messages and the fact that these were actually attacks on where civilians suffered and discussed in a commercial messaging app instead of any government platform, or this is an app that anyone can download, right? And them just throwing around fist emojis and fire emojis and American flags. I mean, just the as I said, the whole arrogance and ignorance and stupidity of these people doing this.
But, come on, that shouldn't be news to you in this administration. Come on. If you're surprised about that, I mean, yes, you can be appalled by it, but you cannot really be surprised by it anymore. It's we're 3 months in. It's kind of clear who these people are.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Once again, people dead on the other side of the world that the USA has terrorized for decades. And then these people not taking any accountability is just the epitome of white supremacy once again. And anyway, I guess we can talk about the stupidity of these people forever. But what we want to correct or talk about more is the talks about Signal and is Signal secure now and so on. So you want to comment on that? Is Signal secure?
Yeah, first off, you very well covered the things that happened at the beginning of the week. This was all reported at the beginning of the week, but especially the US is still talking about it because also of the way that they are mishandling. And let me, before we go anywhere, unequivocally say, yes, Signal is secure. For anyone in the general population, it is probably the most secure messaging and communication system that you can use. That said, why then are also credible journalists talking about Signal being unsecure or that being an unsecure or problematic place for the government? You recall that when we talked about security, we talked a lot about context. We talked about threat models and the different threat models defining what security means. And that is a very important distinction to be made here. When we talk about classified information, we're talking about a completely different threat model by itself. The idea of classified information is that you want to restrict access and restrict movement of that information in the first place only to completely trusted places and people. That is a completely different way of dealing with information than the way that, for example, Signal deals with as you said, anybody can download it. I refrain from the word commercial because not just because the government is not doing it does not mean something is commercial. It's still a non-profit that doesn't ask for money. I don't consider that a commercial application,
Yep.
but it's a privately organized and not government funded application for sure. It's also slightly telling that they use Signal and not WhatsApp. Just a side note here. They're not using WhatsApp, they're using Signal as well, which is a non-profit that they probably, through Doge, would stop funding if they find that they give that money, but still use it. All of that said, the way that you work with classified information is simply completely different. You only let trusted devices by only trusted people to even receive that information. So the way that this couldn't have happened in a classified system is that classification usually has different levels that information can be classified as, and that would be, let's say, that's a classification level 5. If you tried to add someone to that information that only has a clearance level for 3, just these are hypotheticals, of course, the system would deny them access. You would never have a journalist that gets this kind of level of intelligence because of these inherent trust systems that are built into the system. So why do they use Signal? That's slightly speculation, but I have a few things that I would like to mention that are relevant here. Number one is these classified systems, and especially the US government, has very strict rules on the communication record keeping that governments do. We have incredibly detailed records, for example, of the Nixon administration, to the point that he Nixon himself taped everything in the Oval Office, right? That is all in public, not publicly accessible, but in records of the US, and can be used by historians later. So classified apps also contain this archiving mechanism that the US law requires. If you use other apps like Signal, they do not have that. So they might be using that because over there they can use a different language because they know it's not going to be in the record. That's maybe also why it's especially appalling. They potentially wouldn't do that on the classified systems, even though it's unlikely that it will ever get out. But that's one thing. The other thing is this classification system that I described before usually means less good UX, right? You might not have something as cool as emojis and reply GIFs and that kind of stuff. So they might wanted to use the Signal chat because it's so much easier for them to. Both of these things said, first off, the classification and classified material. The other problem that using Signal in this kind of situation is as soon as you move into this high level of government situation, of course, your threat model changes. You have become a very interesting target for a lot of potentially very powerful enemies. In this particular case, we're talking about Yemen and the Houthis that were the target there. That is very interesting information for Iranian intelligence services. And assuming that the devices that are kept by a cabinet, especially the private phones, are not hacked by at least some of the adversaries is a stretch. The other thing that classified information systems do is that they have trusted devices. You get a device from the administration that you can use for classified information. Very often it's a hardened laptop and that kind of stuff. The administration, the technologies people behind that and security people behind that guarantee you that this is not hacked by a foreign adversary. That is not something you can assume for a regular phone. So if you use a private Signal, probably some of the intelligence officers have seen it, especially with so many people on it. And so that is the other violation here. But neither of these are Signal's fault. Signal isn't trying to be a classified system. It's meant to be a secure chat where people that you didn't invite to the chat will not be able to read your messages. It will not prevent you from adding the wrong people to the chat. That it can't know. And it's not trying to be a place for a closed system of people that have inherent trust, but it's actively open as a replacement for SMS or chat that has a more open. And so in that sense, because these things that I said are true for the government shouldn't be using Signal for this kind of information. That's pretty clear. Some of the journalists out there have been calling Signal insecure. And that is true in that specific context. but it's not true for the general public. And in particular, sad about Anne Applebaum, who's also with The Atlantic, who was yesterday on a podcast where she called Signal specifically insecure, which I find very distressing because Signal is very useful to journalists in particular as a means of communication for sources. So going out there and calling Signal publicly insecure, although true in this particular circumstance, gives the wrong impression that Signal itself was insecure. All of that said, one of the kick-off points of that was an article that summarized, probably in an attempt to hit again on the Trump administration's incompetence, that just a few days earlier, the administration had actually sent a message internally to its staff saying they shouldn't use Signal for classified information, and it's actually technically forbidden within their policy to use Signal for classified information. And there's a leak of a document that they warned specifically against Signal as a platform that is being attacked for phishing. Adversaries try to phish you into connecting with them, and even at some point register a second device. You will probably know that with your phone you can have your computer also look at those messages. So some adversaries have been trying to do that. It seems particular from Russia to get this kind of access, which is not Signal's fault, and Signal's actually working very strongly, very hard against that. However, that, if you're not having the background of understanding of that, could seem as if the government had been warning about a known security vulnerability, a security problem in Signal, which is not true. It's the way that this platform is being used by others. And so we want to sit here and set the record straight. If you're using Signal as an activist, even if you heard it seems to be insecure, that is true for government classified information, but I doubt that you're dealing with that, and that is your threat model. So no, Signal by far is the most secure application that we have out there for general purpose communication for the general public. And there are no known.
Yeah, that brings me to this article by 404 Media that the title is "When Your Threat Model is Being a Moron."
Yeah.
And it says that, quoting this article now, it says that no phone, no app, no encryption can protect you from yourself if you send the information you're trying to hide directly to someone you don't want to have it.
Exactly.
And basically, I guess that's also summarize it like, maybe if you are security government official, don't use Signal and have these discussions on your personal device or whatever they used.
I mean, so there was also like, why would these people, these directions, like why would they have Signal, and why would they have even the phone number of a journalist? It's very likely that for journalists it's a very useful app, and as a politician you also have phone numbers of journalists and you can directly call them. That is no in particular scary or problematic in here. Yeah, it's a usage error, but that brings me to one thing we briefly covered that as well. It is a usage error. It is not something that Signal by itself can cover. But when talking about security, this is where operational security is so important. It's more than just, is that thing end-to-end encrypted? What we mentioned as well, where if you can't be sure that the group of people that are in this chat also know how to use that chat well, it's vulnerable for these kind of attacks. Anybody could accidentally add someone else, and if you don't confirm that they are the ones that you need them to be, you could be compromised. This is also something we have been thinking of a little bit with Hector as well, and I brought that up a few episodes ago. A common way to prevent that is to have these concept of onions or inner circles, right? Where the more classified something is, the stricter your security guards go. The way that we try to help you avoid this mistake is that you can basically, when you create a new chat, you can say, invite everyone from that other space. And so you already have this trusted circle. You don't accidentally tap single individuals from your address book, which we don't actually even access in Actor. We don't know your contacts. We only know who's on the platform. Whenever you speak to someone, we show you also how often you have been, or in how many other places you are with them, to give you a better indication that this is the person you're actually looking for, not someone else. But moreover, like keeping these circles clean, You can't aid that. Signal by itself doesn't try to do that because it's meant to be a more open, every chat being basically its own chat, disconnected space. So these kind of things can, it's not part of the threat model that they're trying to address, and therefore they don't have the UX to help you mitigate at least some of that. Again, like classified systems wouldn't allow you to do that in the first place. You wouldn't have the ability to add a journalist in the first place.
Maybe I'm curious to hear also from your side, like after this scandal and some people kind of trying to put Signal on bad light or is not secure. Do you think this would bring like bad attention to Signal? In that sense that it would become more interesting target from the US government to take them down or sue them or something. Meanwhile, they are actually actively themselves using it on their very
Right. Well, hypocrisy has never stopped the Trump administration,
yeah,
right? So that's not a
yeah.
problem. Um,
Like, what if this was actually intended?
no, I don't think so. I mean, some of the pundits from the American right do make that claim. Like, and even if that was a big mistake that everybody could see it, did you see how amazing those messages were? And I'm like, did you? Okay, interesting. So far, I've not seen a campaign to actually paint Signal itself in a bad light. It's more by it trying to show the incompetence of the US administration and shortcutting that a little much too much, in my opinion. Some of the journalists, even in this sense, meaning well, actually create this picture of Signal being less secure than it is, especially for the general public. That could be misunderstood. And this is why we're talking about this as well as a special episode today, is to make sure that especially activists do not hastily try to get off that because they heard some Anne Applebaum say, but Signal is an insecure chat. Yes, for classified information, but not for your problem. And that is actually a big issue because there's essentially in institutions, there's two main things. The number one thing is how well do they actually work, right? And then the other thing is how much trust does the public have into them, especially in democracies. This is the more important thing, to be blunt. So you can have the most amazing encryption technology. If people don't trust you and your organization to do the right thing, it doesn't matter. No one's going to use it. Because to some degree, in modern society, but also in earlier societies, you need to trust others. You will not ever have full proof of everything. And so this trust being eroded unintentionally, so far as I can see, by actually well-meaning journalists is I think a big problem. And this is why we also, because it makes Signal look worse and maybe takes people off of trying to use it or even willing to use it. Now, probably a lot of people will have a harder time when they try to convince people to use Signal that they would come back and say, why don't we use WhatsApp? It's also encrypted and it did not leak classified information, which is a completely bullshit point, but it's there and it's a problem of trust. So Signal directly answered as well. Like on the next day, they were already clarifying when this article came out that there's no vulnerability, and they have been working very well to sustain their trust. From what I can see, also the security community is overwhelmingly on their side. It's very much making clear these journalists are talking bullshit when they say it's insecure, that it's just reckless to say the way they say it. That is simply not true. I don't think there's a Trump campaign or like even knowledge about this behind this. Does that mean Trump is not going to go after it? No, it doesn't mean that. They already painting the journalists they inadvertently put into the chat, into bad light, as if he did anything wrong. He didn't do anything, but they are trying to have a smear campaign against him, which unfortunately very often works. So there's no guarantee with this government that they're not still also, if this goes on, try to paint Signal in bad light and make them responsible for it somehow to their follower base. But so far we have not seen any of it.
Yeah. Well, pretty much everything is uncertain with this administration,
Yeah.
so we never know. We don't know. I actually haven't looked at the Signal's own response to that, and maybe I will have a look. But if we're taking some takeaways from this, maybe it is that actually very realistic threat model could be someone inside your group intentionally or not intentionally adding some person into your private chat or group, and that kind of can be prevented pretty much by having software.
No, if the user asks for it, the software follows. I mean, like in classified systems, the software wouldn't follow. It would say that person doesn't have the security keys. They don't have the device. We will not give them access, right? The data will never make it there. But in a general public system, even for your very, let's say, radical groups out there in terms of activism, you will not want to have this strength of military grade, as it is called, security. For one, because you cannot run it. It requires a lot of people to actually make sure this works. And the other thing is because the usability is just really bad. It really makes a lot of things a lot worse for that security to stay and remain. And that makes it highly impractical, especially in not paid circumstances, for anybody to run these systems. But you're making a very good point, and that is something that's been, whenever being asked about these kind of chats and these kind of things for various organizations, the number one recommendation is always write in a chat in a way that if it would be published tomorrow in the national newspaper, you would be fine and able to defend this, right? Don't, even as a joke, inside of these kind of activism groups, talk about chopping someone's head off or something like that. Anything that could be very easily misconstrued as a terrorism attack or any of that kind of stuff. Even if you're frustrated and you just mean that as a joke, the context and sarcasm and many other things, tone in particular, is not conveyed in chat messages. So that makes it really hard to convince others after the fact that this is not the case. The reason for that is not only that while you can have to end-to-end encryption, and some of the apps also prevent screenshots, someone else coming by with a different phone taking a picture of that screen is not something you can prevent. This is never going to be preventable, and it doesn't even require someone to be actively added to the chat that is malicious. It can also be that you have a falling out later with some of the people that were in the chat, and they are angry with you. Now they leak those messages. That is a very human thing that still happens. So in general, do not have these conversations, especially on recorded media. And chat is recorded media. You wouldn't write that in a letter to your grandma either. Don't write it in a chat message. It's not better and more secure.
Short and sweet as usual. Don't miss our other episodes of this mini-series.
Subscribe to Digital Activism wherever you get your podcasts from.
By the way, we are thinking about changing the name of the podcast, so if you have any ideas or suggestions or any other comments, let us know, either by the Actor app or email us at podcast@actor.global.